Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, also known as 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. You can learn more about 3PGC at 3pgc.org. And today we are very lucky to have Dave Nichols with us. Dave is Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Sustainable Change and a leader in three principles-based community development. Immediately preceding his role as the center's executive director, Dave, along with Amy Chen Mills Nam, if I said that right, Naeem, okay, co-directed the center's W.K. Kellogg Foundation funded National Community Resiliency Project, the NCRP. For over 3 years, he led NCRP's on-site work in Charlotte, North Carolina. For nearly 17 years, Dave was executive director for the nonprofit Lakewood Community Development Corporation. Under his leadership, over half of all housing units in the inner city Charlotte neighborhood of Lakewood were built new or rehabilitated. Public infrastructure there was improved dramatically. Dave began introducing Three Principles programming to Lakewood residents in 2008 and witnessed transformative effects on the neighborhood, including a significant drop in violent crime. So that's quite an impressive bio, Dave. And to everyone out there who's on Google+, I want you to know that there is a Q&A box on the right-hand side, and we would particularly love to hear any comments or questions throughout the discussion to keep it as interactive as possible. So, Dave, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate working with you in the planning for this, but particularly for the opportunity to be here and share with folks today. I really do. So thank you. In the bio that you read, you gave some indication that I really have come into the principles from a community development background. My experience began back in the, I guess, late 80s, really, with work with Habitat for Humanity. And that early work with one particular house through just as a support program through our church, I realized that the work that I had been doing for my own livelihood as a kitchen and bath designer was work that typically would cost high-end clients $30,000, $40,000 sometimes, even in those days. And I had this realization shortly after we finished that first house that I had already built an entire house and placed a family of 6 in permanent housing for $35,000. And it just sort of jarred me to realize that I really needed to be putting my efforts into doing more of that than doing more kitchens. And so I did that for 3 years. And the organization had been up until that time totally volunteer. This was in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in the where the University of North Carolina is. And at the end of that period, realized that someone needed to put a Habitat hat on in the mornings, not just on Saturdays. And so I convinced the board of directors for that group to hire me so that we could have some focus all the time. And within 3 years, we moved from having built 7 houses in 7 years to a total of, within those 3 years, having a total of 24 houses. So there was a pent-up demand, if you will, for the affordable housing that was needed, particularly in what was the most expensive area of the entire state to find housing. In that process, I realized that Habitat was always focused on where's the next piece of land, where can we put the next house, where can we build a house for the next family. And there was very, very little interest or concern about the quality of life where that house was going to be built. And I just had this nagging feeling that there should be a way to incorporate concern about the whole community in which the house was located. And so after those 3 years, I began looking for work in something I knew nothing about, just was community development. And in doing that, found a position in Charlotte, which after a couple of years changed actual locations, but in 95 became the heart of where I and my wife moved to and lived for the next, well, now we're still living here. It's almost 21 years now. In that work, I found out that the real job, as it was defined by the primary funders, which was the federal government, the city of Charlotte, and some of those, was to build houses, build sidewalks and curbs and gutters and get better streets and fix up the park. And for 10 years, I did that and did it fairly successfully. The neighborhood that we moved into and are living in was at the time considered by the police to be the very worst neighborhood in all of Charlotte. And so we worked really hard for about 10 years, built half of the units had been torn down and built new houses, and or at least rehabbed a few, so that more than half the housing was replaced. The issue, though, was nothing really changed. The people that lived here would mostly want to tell you, well, I only live here because I can't afford to live anywhere else, and I wouldn't want to have anything to do with the neighborhood because it's so bad, and I wouldn't trust anybody next door or anything. And it was about that time, this would have been 2005, that a friend of ours from the church we've been attending asked if she could come over and talk with us, and she brought this book. She said, I just thought something here might be of interest to you. And the book was Jack Pransky's book about Modelo. And after I read that, I realized there has to be something in here. If he was able to achieve those kinds of results in a community that was exactly like our community in Charlotte, that I was missing the boat somewhere. And so I went ahead almost immediately looking for this guy that at that point I was convinced wore long white robes and sandals, called Roger Mills. And I found Roger, had sessions with him in Minneapolis, and had training the next year in California. And began to kind of have an inkling of what he was sharing with me about how the people in the neighborhood could change, which is what I was much more concerned about. And it was about that time with our requests of how can we get you to come to Charlotte and teach us this stuff, because I didn't know really what it was yet, and it took me quite a while, it seemed, to really understand. It was Roger was able to go to the Kellogg Foundation and get some funding, about a 4-year series of fundings, to form what they called the National Community Resiliency Project. And we were the first sort of what they would call startup within that project. We took on Des Moines, Iowa, which had begun introducing this several years before, but needed to expand it. And then the next year, we actually added a centerpiece of the Kellogg focus, which was in the Delta area of Mississippi. And it was through that project and working with Roger, and then after he passed, even with his daughter Amy and Gabriella and others, that I realized things were really beginning to change. And it wasn't, people saying, oh, that's the greatest thing since hot butter or anything. It was just people started seeing each other differently and talking with each other and meeting people on the street and saying hello. The police sort of summarized it at one point in a group meeting we had for talking with a funder, actually, to say that what had really shown to them how much things had changed in the neighborhood was because the police were now getting the telephone calls when there were problems. No one would ever call the police beforehand. I'm not going to be a snitch. I'm just going to tend to my business. There was that much fear and angst within the neighborhood. I guess the more telling piece was the point at which our middle school principal called me out of the blue. I didn't know her at all. Called me and said who she was and said, I just want to ask you what you're doing over there in Lakewood. And I said, oh me, what have we, what are we in for now? And she said, well, those Lakewood kids used to be the ones who were always missing school, always in fights, always causing problems. It was, but something's different because they're not doing that now. They're actually coming to school and their grades are improving. So you must be doing something. We went over, took several folks with us and explained our understanding of how things can change when people are recognized for the wisdom that they really have, and that they can really calm down and be more focused in their own lives. And so we were invited to, well, if you can do that for that neighborhood, you need to come over and fix our school, fix the kids in our school. And so we actually worked for a year in the school with the Kellogg grant and some other funding from the city for 1 year. And we, interestingly enough, really didn't work with the kids. We worked with the teachers, the parents. And the kids sort of picked up on it, because when things changed around them and when they were treated differently and respected differently and listened to differently, they began to change. And it was that effortless for some of the change that happened within the school. What I've begun to realize is, and it's been over the years recently that I've really, I feel like, become a little more grounded in the principles, and sort of learned for myself inside what Sid has been pointing us to. And that is that we as humans obviously have this internal, this energy that is beyond who we are physically. Sid referred to it as the mind. And what I've come to realize is that it is that energy, that principle that underlies our lives, that is really the source that connects all of us together. That we, in fact, as humans, are social beings. Everything we do is connected to somebody else, and in a wide variety of ways and fashions, but that we are inherently connected through this universal energy, this wisdom, this mind, and that as we live through life and seek to find guidance and wisdom and the best path for us to take, we are always doing that within a community setting. We are influenced, be they personal thoughts about things my parents told me, or things the principal wants me to do, or, I've got to learn this. But there's a deeper level at which we are all about the same thing: a peaceful, productive, passionate life that we've been given, and finding ways that we can live that life in harmony, really, with others. What has changed in my experience within this community has reflected in many ways the heart of what Sid had introduced to us, which is everything that I do impacts someone else. And everything the thoughts that I have are part of the broader community. If I think that the park is a dangerous place to go and don't want to go there, that is telescoped to other people in the community. But when the thought is had that, yeah, the park's been a pretty dangerous place, but I think we could go clean it up, then that creates a different community feeling and a different relationship with the community. And so for me, the community relationship that we have as individuals with the world outside of us is really critical to who we are and how we function individually. I guess one of the things that we need to recognize is that, in our country particularly, but seemingly increasingly across the world, there is so much more emphasis on the individual. And we tend, as humans, to approach the world as if we are the primary unit and the world is reacting to us. And things that happen to us because of what's happening on the outside. And when we realize that what is truly happening is the same for every person, and that we are connected to other people integrally through our thoughts and through our being able to access what is the thoughts of not what is best for me, but what is best for the community. And seeing that every time the community is enhanced, my life is enhanced. And it's a paradigm shift, very similar to Sid's introducing the principles at all. It's a huge shift in the way we think. But as we approach life, as if we can see that we are inevitably and innately connected with every other person, and that and approach life accessing wisdom that asks first, what is it that is best for all? What is it that is going to benefit my neighbors or my community or my city or my state? What is it that's in this decision that I'm making, this direction I'm taking, that would benefit everyone, rather than trying to control things for my own benefit? And when that level of understanding comes, things magically, if you will, begin to change for communities. Because when we see that connection, when we understand how deep that relationship is, and that every person is coming at this world from the same place, and that they are each doing the very best that they can, given their thinking at that point, given their understanding, but that they have that capacity within them. It's exactly the same as what we have. And when we can do that, look at that world, and together come up with an agreements on what is best for all, it will always be what's best for us. And so for me, my understanding and my taking the principles that Sid shared with us into community has awakened in me a level of consciousness, if you will, about the people that I live with. And when that level of acknowledgement for folks that are here, when there's that level of acceptance of people, there's what emerges is what I would almost call an innate trust that at the heart of all other people is this innate wisdom and this innate resiliency that can benefit everyone. And to me, that trust that we establish when we meet another person and we are truly open and curious and seeking who they are and what their dreams are, and are able to acknowledge that in them, both parties are enhanced. It's not something we're doing to them or selling to them, but that acknowledgement that we're the same, and that in that acknowledgement we can benefit ourselves as each of ourselves and the broader group as a whole. Is there a question that you might have?
I have a question for you. So, this is amazing, the results that you had in the Lakewood community and how things turned around. It really struck me, what you mentioned about the police saying now they're calling us. What I'm curious about is, how did you begin to reach out to people in this community? Because in my mind, I can see, like, if you have people interested in the three principles, you can create a meetup and they're coming because they're interested in that. Or if you're going into a prison, which is incredible, you kind of have a captive audience because they're either mandated to come to the meeting, or maybe they're coming so that they can get out of, whatever else they might have been doing. But here was an open community with people who were very fearful and probably wouldn't show up if you said, hey, we're having a community meeting. So how did you go about starting that?
I guess there's several answers to that question. When I first came into the neighborhood, I physically, literally rolled up my sleeves and started cutting brush and clearing the area where our community park had used to have been. It had actually been abandoned when the Hurricane Hugo came through Charlotte in '89. That was 6 years before I came here, and no one had even bothered to cut a tree. It was just left. And I just went out and took my little axe and chainsaw and just started cutting things. And eventually people came and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I just kind of thought it'd be nice to have a park again. And so, well, can I help? Sure. So it was at that level when people could meet me on oh, he's going to actually do something. he wants to make a change here. And then my recognizing them as, well, you live here too. Let's work together. We're coming at this from the same angle. When we set as a purpose to introduce the principles per se, the primary thing we did was announce that we were going to have a meal, whether it was at the park or at the church or somewhere else in the neighborhood. We were going to have hot dogs, everybody come out, Just the process of getting people to see each other in a setting that was safe was the beginning of that transformation. I had at one point we had a dinner meeting. It was at the church, and these two ladies, rather elderly black ladies, came up to each other and said, called themselves each by name, and said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And the other person responded, "Well, I actually live down on the end of Lakewood Street." "Really?" "Yeah, I've lived there for 25 years. And and she said, "Oh, I can't believe that." And she says, "Well, why are you here?" She says, "Well, I live over on Oregon Street, and I've lived there for 15 years." And it turns out these two women have been active members of the same church for all those years, but they would never tell each other where they lived. So that was the kind of thing that began happening organically when people got together. "Oh, do you know so and so?" "Well, yeah, that's my cousin." you know. So that was the level at which we were able to begin, introducing this. Was who knows who, what's really happening here. All the people aren't bad, you know. And so we would literally just have get-togethers, and we would couple that with maybe an hour of discussion. What's going on in the neighborhood? How do you feel? And we would work in where some of those thoughts might be coming from. Had you ever realized that, you could have a different thought about that situation? Maybe an example. Someone called me back when nobody was calling the police. They would call me to call the police for them. And called and said, "This house next door to us, they've just got to be a huge drug center, because yesterday and last night, there were cars just lined up all over the street, and people were coming and going, and loud music, and I just know they were dealing drugs." And I says, "Well, I'll try to check into it and see, but I'll let you know what I find out." So I rode by the house to see, and when I got there that midday that next morning, I noticed the folks were taking down this little banner that was on the front porch. It said "Happy Birthday." And so when I reported that back to the other person, they realized that they had made an assumption, had a thought, and created a whole reality around these are drug dealers. And when they realized that, it dawned on them that I could see the world differently. We would have some training sessions once in a while. One of the early ones that we had was it was going to be about parenting, because everyone had expressed an interest. I just don't know what to do. My middle school kid is just off the chain. I can't control him. He's, or just a number of issues that had come up. And so we said, well, maybe parenting is something people feel that they're lacking somehow, So maybe we could introduce something around that theme. And we had the first night, we had maybe, I think it was 12 or 15, all women, most of them single heads of household in the neighborhood, that were interested in I'm going to go hear this guy talk about how to be a better parent. And when we started the meeting, I had everybody introduce themselves, and there was an occasional, "Oh, oh, that's where you live. I didn't know that was you, that sort of thing. When we got around the room, I was my time to introduce myself, and I told them a little bit about where I lived, and what I was doing here. And I said, now you've all come together for this parenting workshop here, and it's on the notice that I'm facilitating it. But in full disclosure, I need to tell you up front, I've never been a parent. And it was like, oh, why did we come to this meeting? But I said, that's just the bad news. The good news is that all of you are parents. And we were off to the races. I mean, that acknowledgement that the real wisdom in the room was the room, and that everyone there knew a lot more about parenting than I did, for sure, and that they could begin to share that. And that workshop became just a beautiful exposure for those women on seeing their children differently and being open to knowing and hearing other parents in the neighborhood that they could confide in and trust. And there were some very remarkable transformations for the women, but for the children in those homes as well. And so the how was really at the heart. It was acknowledging the individuals within the community, giving them the space, the safety, the trust to be able to come together and begin to relax just that little bit, see something a little different, and open that door to what became, in many, many cases, some real transformations.
I really love hearing stories of how the three principles affects people. And this story, and I know the Medela story, and there are others of affecting entire communities, it just really shows the power of what the three principles has to offer. I'm curious if you have any suggestions for people who might want to start something with community. I know the group that you work with can provide help. Maybe you can share a little bit of that. And anyone who has anything to share, please do type questions into the site.
Thank you. Just to give you a little background of how I've come to be more involved with the center, and many folks may not know that little bit of history, but Roger Mills and George Pransky were the first two psychologists to ever meet Sid, and they met him, went to Salt Spring, and kind of came at this at the same time. And this may be oversimplifying things, and I apologize but these are just my thoughts and my understanding. But George and his wife and others saw an opportunity to be able to take this understanding to folks who are really struggling in business and making really bad decisions for human relations and all of this. And they set a focus for their introducing this in the world predominantly among the business folks, folks that were in leadership positions, not necessarily business, but in leadership positions. Well, Roger seemed to have a little bit more curiosity. He had come through his academic training, had been in the hard sciences, knowing that, well, I need proof that this is going to work. And it was from that he had concluded that if this is as good as it seems to be, then it should work not only for business people, but for people who don't have a job, for people who are destitute, for people who have been trapped because of their thinking in horrendous cultural situations. And it was that motivation that led him to take on that very first project in Modelo. And I think his realization to see that the depth of change in people that were in those situations convinced him to focus his work on, we'll call it community settings, where the rubber meets the road, where people are having daily struggles, whether to find a bus to get to a job or to find the job to be able to afford the bus, And he repeated the Modelo experience in a number of communities in the Bronx, New York, in San Francisco, in Oakland, a number of other settings. And over those years, he spent a lot of his effort writing about and talking about how important change was at this root level, at the street level, if you will. And that was where I was introduced to the principles through him, to see that that what he had done in those other communities, maybe he could do it here. And in that process, I became deeply aware of how this could change the world. I mean, if it's worked in that many places and that many things, and then when I experienced it for myself and saw the level of change among people in this little community, where the median income is $23,000 a year, and to see the level of resilience that these folks have and their ability to see the world not as the enemy, but as a source for their lives, that there are answers, and to be open to those alternatives. And so when Roger passed away, Amy and Gabriella continued the work with the center for a year and a half or two, but recognized that they wanted to be in front of people and doing trainings and doing workshops and helping people actually get this message, and that they were not administrators. And so when it came to the point of deciding whether to return the last year of Kellogg's funding, or to be able to use it at the school that we had just set up in Charlotte to work in, I just asked Amy if there's any way I could be of help so they didn't have to close the center, because it was an administrative burden. I mean, running a nonprofit is no joke. I mean, it's at least as hard, if not more so, than running a business, because I've done both. Because when you're running the business, you pretty much can focus on your own results, but when you're running a nonprofit, you're focused on everybody else's results. And so I came in just from the angle that, well, Amy, I've been running nonprofits for 20 years. Maybe I could help us at least get through this next year. And when the board interviewed me and decided they would like for me to take that position, it came to me the full depth of what the center could be. And where we have come over these years of testing and change and everything that we've been going through is that we can be, as an organization, help to people wherever they are, and that we can honor the passion and the wisdom that any one person or any group of people, any institution, any organization, any nonprofit or whatever, that we can be a catalyst for them to be able to achieve their vision, what they see might be possible given their strengths, given the wisdom that's coming to them about how this could be taken into my community to help change the way our children are exposed to life, the way the schools function, the way social services are delivered, the way juvenile detention is run. I mean, all of the aspects that impacts the children and youth and even young adults who are in fact the future, that if the center can help structure for folks with basic understanding, thoughts, and ideas about ways they might impact their community where they live, that we can bring some other pieces to that. So often, if people with passion say, "Oh, I'll just go out and start teaching," but we know that there's a real important piece of when you're introducing the principles to have the setting that will be a sustainable setting, that will be sharing it with people, but at the same time having those people open to the idea of sharing it themselves. The whole concept of transforming the kids at a school by working with the teachers and parents, and bringing to that initial concern, that initial passion to do something in their community, bringing along with that an evaluation process that can be applied in any community, but systematically couple the efforts with quality evaluation. And in some cases, we might even do actual research, but to get to capture the impacts and the change that's being made in that setting, no matter how small it is, that each one of those will capture a building momentum for how we can interest more people. And that having a place, having a center, if you want to call it center, but having a structure that people can come to for that little bit more. And at the same time, be able to provide the strength and connection for that person to, oh, you're interested in working with youth, with juvenile delinquents. Well, what if I set you up with a meeting with the folks in Des Moines who've been doing youth justice for 10 years? And making that connection reinforces for the person their own strengths. Wow, they've done that. Well, I know I can do more than I thought I could do. And so our vision for the next 10 years is that what we would like to help evolve is this network of people who've had some kind of exposure to the principles, help them deepen that understanding, deepen their capacities to go ahead and step out and do it with confidence that they have some support behind them. And if we can build that sort of community, which is where my passion has come from, we build in a level of strength and energy that is absolutely limitless. And so that's where I get passionate about working in a community with a different, that's the world itself. We get caught in our egos, and that somehow I'm following wisdom and you're not, or something. But the reality is that we cannot judge someone else's level of wisdom. We can only point them to the fact that they can have that. And when we approach, when we can free ourselves from the thoughts of control, that we know better than others, to me, this is the biggest challenge that we have right now in the Three Principles community, is truly trusting that other people already have this. It's something that I think we need as a community to look at very closely, and it begins inside with us. So are we willing to trust that people other than us can also be in charge of things and do things and make decisions, for better or for worse? It's their decision and not ours.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a big one for me as well. That trust. Gosh, Dave, this was such a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate it. I just, we're coming close to the top of the hour. I just want to give you the opportunity to ask if there's anything you want to say to wrap up the conversation.
Well, I guess I don't think there's too much. I guess what drove me to want to present this subject was seeing the power of transformation that I've experienced living in this very challenged community. and seeing how that can be applied across the world, whether it's, whether it's in another community like in New Bern, North Carolina, in a housing project, or whether it's in Nigeria where Boko Haram is devastating communities with violence. It can work anywhere when people are willing to trust that they're a part of something much bigger than themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was very inspirational, and yeah, really, really great share. Thank you so much. And Dave, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they could reach you?
Okay, our website, Center for Sustainable Change, is just that. All the words all together, centerforsustainablechange.org. The word center, I have to be careful, is the Anglican American spelling, CENTER, because in British it would be RE. So, but that's our website. And my email is dave@centerforsustainablechange.org. So, and there are other contact sources on the web if you can utilize those phone numbers and things like that. So
great. Thank you.
Anyone that is at all interested in knowing more about us, but more importantly, willing to share with us what their interest is, and to see if there's ways that we can help, collaborate, bring resources, work together. To me, that's what it's all about for all of us. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Yeah. Maybe we can talk again in a year and see what's come out of just this webinar, and
love that.
New ideas that have sprung from people listening to this show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And I just want to thank everybody who was on live and who's going to be listening. And I also want to say we've been doing 2 webinars a month now with 3pgc.org. The next one coming up is on February 23rd with Linda Pransky. And after that, on March 10th with Dr. Amy Johnson. And one other announcement, please save the date. The next 3PGC conference is scheduled in the greater Los Angeles area. It's going to be Thursday, October 27th through Sunday, October 30th, and hope to see many people who watch us at the conference. The registration is not open yet, but I think that it's going to be soon. So thank you, everyone. Dave, thank you so much. This is really inspirational.
Thank you, and thanks to 3PGC for allowing me to come and share. I really appreciate it.